Well, Pete, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here. I was just saying before we started, you're the OG of the Sober podcast. So to be here it means a lot.
Oh, but you're so sweet. Thank you so much. Yeah, it'll be 8 years next month.
That's amazing. I mean, you really were at the forefront. We were talking about our buddy Shane, that Sober Guy podcast,
Yeah.
and you. I mean, when I started to look for sober podcasts, when my um, iTunes or whatever would populate, it would be you guys, and that's pretty cool.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a minute and there's
some
a
of the
lot of
first
new
sober voices I heard.
That
And then
is
podcast
wild.
run. Yeah,
That is so cool.
yeah,
Sometimes it's like create these episodes in an echo chamber, right? You
yeah.
just I just am so excited I get to talk to cool people like you, and we just have fun, and we talk about sobriety stuff, and then you just kind of release it into the wild, and then you never know what it's going to
That's
do.
the idea. I mean, really, it's truly, it comes from the heart. And
Yeah.
after that, it's like, just like let it free and see where it goes. Right.
Yeah, yeah. And it's led to some really, and I'm sure you've had this experience too with your podcast. You just get to talk to people you normally wouldn't get to talk to. I'm sure you reach out to you and just be like, hey.
Yeah. Whether it's the people I'm talking to on the other end, like talking to you when you came on my podcast, or just talking to people that hear it and maybe it strikes a chord in them. It's
Yeah.
all really super beneficial. And and sometimes it's uncomfortable too, like to make the steps to do it because I don't like doing work. Right. So, but it's always fulfilling, right? It's the same
Yeah.
thing that got me drunk. And I refuse to get sober because I just, oh, like that looks hard, so
Yeah.
let's not do it. Let's just take the shortcut. That was my whole life.
Yeah. Well, we got to get into it because I am totally, I know you have a really good story, but first we're going to play a little game. We're going to play a little game called the lightning round, which is very slow, which you may have heard.
I have, yes.
Um, I know you've been sober for a while, but when you first got sober, was there a book that really helped you early on?
The big book. I mean, that
Yeah.
was it. That was, yeah, that because, and it goes back to what I was just saying. Like somebody had to kind of put my nose in it and we went through it. And then I started to open up and really, it was pretty amazing experience.
Yeah, I remember reading it for the first time, and there was like all this old-timey language, like,
Yeah.
oh, John Barleycorn. I was like, who the hell?
I got another book for you too. That is um like the number one, the top notch, but really one that this is interesting. Christopher Lawford Kennedy wrote a book, and gosh, I can't think of it, but it was I can't think of the name. It was all these celebrities that wrote about getting sober. It was released like I think probably in the 90s. Uh,
Really?
it was called it is called Moments of Clarity. And somebody gave it
Oh,
to me when I couldn't get sober. And so I remember I was on a plane and I was on drugs and I'd been drinking, but I knew at this point in time I'd already committed to go to rehab. It was one of those deals like, okay, I'll go to rehab. Give me a week, which is like, uh, it's just
I'll
like,
do it later.
yeah, yeah. But I knew I was going to treatment when I was flying on this plane for like my last little trip. And I was reading the book, and like Lou Gossett Jr. has a chapter, Alec Baldwin has a chapter, Jamie Lee Curtis has a chapter, Hollywood Henderson has a chapter, and it changed my life. Like I remember thinking, if these people can do this, these people who for whatever malfunction that I have, I put on such a pedestal,
Mhm.
um, that if they can do it, I can do it. And they seem like they're doing great. I didn't know that these people were sober because
Yeah,
they seemed like they were living these fulfilled, amazing lives. And here I was thinking I was in some prison, and that just wasn't the truth.
that is
Moments of
wild.
clarity. Yeah.
Yeah, moments of clarity. I often thought about doing a book. This title, Evidence of God, keeps coming up because we have like these little serendipitous moments where I don't know if they necessarily translate. I mean, I've had moments where I'm just like there was something at play that I couldn't explain that was so deeply personal and moving to me. It was like a God shot. It was like an undeniable feeling and experience, and I thought it'd be cool, like, I know so many people who have these experiences. I've always thought it'd be
Oh,
cool to
yeah,
put
that's a
that in a
cool
book.
idea.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to
That's a
listen,
cool idea.
somebody needs to do it, maybe it'll be me, I don't know. But I'm gonna totally check that out.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look that one up. I have read the big book, but I will read the other one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right in your wheelhouse, the second one.
What's that?
That's right in your wheelhouse, the second one. I think
The
you'll
second one, yeah, I
yeah.
will totally check that out. Do do you have a mantra or quote that you live by? Like mine, obviously, is like the one day at a time. Like that has meant a lot to me. Is there a saying? Like there's so many little cliches. Is there anything that kind of carries you through?
Yeah, don't take yourself too seriously. I mean, I find myself saying that a lot,
Yeah.
it's because I think that that's one of my number one pitfalls is that, and it doesn't mean that I think I'm so important. It just means that I'm taking all the
Mm,
things around me very seriously, and that is a major league motivator for me to move in the wrong direction because it leads to a. It's just happened this weekend. You know, I had this work thing. It went great. I'm on top of the world. Everybody should be kissing my ass. And then I hit a little bump in the road and I like completely melt down. Now, not necessarily on the outside, but inside, it's like, why is this happening? What's going on like this? And it's
Oh
all
man.
because something fortunate. I experienced something good, right? And I took myself too seriously. And then I thought that I was, oh, wow, like everything's got to go perfect from here on out. And it's just like, when I'm not taking myself seriously, things you live life like a loose shirt, and like it's such a party. I mean, life is great, really,
I hear
and it's
you.
like you can manage all the stuff that comes your way.
Dude, that is such a good one. I mean, we were just chatting earlier before we hit record. I think I was taking myself a little too seriously.
Yeah, so was I. We talked about it. You think what you have to say is so. Why do I think that what I have to say is going to be some life changing thing? Like really, like and by the way, the scariest part is when that thing is an opinion. Like, look out.
Mm,
Yeah, that's
watch out.
yeah. Nobody
Yeah.
needs to be in front of that.
The idea that I keep coming back to is that I do not know what's right for someone else.
Mm.
I don't. And sometimes I think I do. And that's what happened today, as I was just telling you. I was giving unsolicited advice to a friend. Dude,
Yeah,
I stepped in it. And then I got all upset. And now that you say that, I go, oh, I was taking myself too seriously.
yeah, 100%. And it's
Yeah.
like I can't resist the temptation either. Sometimes I was like, what I
Yeah.
have to say is so important. I need to tell this person like this is the exception, right? Because I know that by
Right.
a rule, don't give people unsolicited advice. But now, oh no, no, now is the time. Yeah,
Yeah, I think, oh, we're friends. So I have the right to
yeah,
be like, hey, I guess that's kind of like we were talking also about we have to have people in our lives who will tell us the truth.
mm-hmm, absolutely.
And and I think that's kind of where I went astray today is I was thinking, oh, I should tell her the truth, but she didn't ask me.
That'll do it just about every time. Yeah.
Oh, so close. No cigar. Oh well. Okay, as far as self-care goes, I know you do a lot of, work on yourself. Do you have like a morning routine or do you think of it as a weekly practice? What does that look
Oh,
like for you?
morning routine is coming soon. Like and the reason I say that is because I get up so early. I'm in this field of work now where I get up at 3:30 a.m. every morning, and it has been like such a gift and such a curse as far as like a routine is concerned. So
Mm,
I constantly find myself, and this is my own stuff, but I play catch up a lot. So
mhm.
like I definitely go to meetings. I see a therapist, running on a trail, walking on a trail. That outdoor stuff is huge for me.
Oh yeah.
Like that is like today I'll get outside for a run. Um, and it's just it's meant everything to me.
Yeah.
In sobriety, that is weaved in with the things we're talking about, the therapy, and
I love
meditation.
therapy.
Yeah, I love therapy too. Meditation, oh, by the way, that also works, but like anything else, you have to practice it, and I don't like to practice anything. So,
You're an
that
athlete. You
yeah,
should be good at
it's
practicing.
fleeting, it's fleeting, but I know that that works, and when I'm really
Yeah.
in a rhythm, that is all good.
Well, okay, so this brings up a really good point that we can allow ourselves to be flexible, right? like you're getting up so early and everyone's
Yeah.
always talking about a morning routine, but you're getting up so early. I mean, probably by the time you get off work, it's still morning.
Yeah, no, it really is, and so a lot of times I'll go to a meeting at noon, if
Okay.
the window is open. I'm and I'm very fortunate. Like,
Yeah.
I do have a lot of alcoholics in my life, alcoholics in recovery, so I'm
Yeah.
constantly talking to other people about, recovery and talking and connecting with other alcoholics, and I'm also everybody around me knows I'm sober,
Yeah.
and, I don't hit people over the head with it, but as sooner or later, if you're close to me, you're gonna know that's part of the drill. So I don't
Yeah.
shy away from talking about it. And I think that
Yeah.
that is, for me, a big self-care portion of it all. I think sometimes, myself included, we can be way too hard on ourselves about what is self-care. I do think we should prioritize it and go out of our way for it. But at the same time, too, I think there's a lot of stuff I'm doing every day that is self-care. That if I'm not really, if I'm talking down to myself, right, and being hard on myself, I'm like, "Ah, you haven't done anything." It's like, "Well, yeah, you have." If
Yeah.
somebody else called me and said, "Have I done anything today?" I'd be like, "Absolutely." But if it's me,
Yeah.
like, you're being lazy.
Yeah. I did that this weekend where I got up early and I was outside and I was planting flowers and doing all this stuff. And then the afternoon, I was just sitting around and I looked at my husband. I was like, God, I'm so lazy. And he was like, What are you talking
Yeah,
about?
what are you talking about?
I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's right. I totally forgot. it's, it's nice to have people in our lives who can remind us of
Remind us,
like
yes. Yeah.
that's awesome. So you've been sober for a while now. I want to say 12 years. Is that accurate?
November 7th, 2011. So this November would, God willing, be 13 years, yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, looking back over all this time, if you could talk to your brand new sober self, is there one thing you wish you would have known back then?
When I first got sober,
Yeah.
it gets so much better. Uh, just like buckle up, and like your wildest dreams can come true. But you have to be willing to go to any lengths. And
Yeah.
it's pretty amazing. I was just talking to somebody earlier today about my life, and they kind of put it back on me, and I checked in. I was like, "Well, how do you think I'm doing with like?" And they were like, "Look, you've gone from 0 to 60, like career wise, in a positive way. Like, in
Yeah.
my mind, I don't have everything that I want, but in this person's mind, it's like you had zero. Yeah, and so that we lose sight of that.
Yeah.
And I like you said, newly sober self, I would be thrilled with all the things I have going today. I remember when I first got sober, and this is different. Maybe some people in sobriety have this now, but this isn't necessarily something that I wanted. My phone never, this is even in sobriety. Like if I got a couple text messages a day, that was a huge deal. I mean, I didn't have a phone for like 6 months, right? I went into a treatment center and then I lived in a
Mm.
halfway house. And so I remember thinking, like, I guess, like, nobody's gonna be like, I guess this is it, right? Like, I guess, like, nobody's really blowing up my phone, and now people blow up my phone and I get annoyed, so
You're all so many friends. I can't stand
yeah,
it.
yeah, I
Can't
mean,
just-
I don't have enough time for all the good things in my life, and
That's
sometimes
amazing.
I can because of the disease, I can hold them at bay. I hold them off because I wanna isolate, and that's not
Oh,
good, yeah. But I would
yeah.
tell answer that's a long answer, I would just say, "Hey, like, buckle up, like, it gets so much better, and your wildest dreams can come true." And it really is, somebody said, I've just many people have said, "But I wish you a slow recovery." Like, I've experienced that, and it's
Mm,
probably the best way.
yeah. Do you feel like it's the best way because you build a really solid foundation? You're kind of
100%.
forced to,
There were
yeah.
certain opportunities that I thought in my life, "Okay, this is about to happen. This is it. This is my break or whatever," and I failed. Not because of drinking, not just because I failed. And I look back now, and every time something better has come along. And it's that's like you talked about, we talked about a little earlier about that book you wanted to write. These God moments where it's like, oh, like that was God working in my life. I probably wasn't ready yet. Um,
Yeah.
so I certainly feel that way. Yeah.
I've had those moments where I really thought I wanted something early in sobriety, and I had a sponsor tell me that God either says yes, not yet, or I have something better.
Mm.
and I never believed that last part. I was like, "Are you sure? Because I'm pretty sure I wanna date this guy." And she's like, "God has something better. Rejection's God's protection." And
I've
thank
heard that, I like that.
yeah, I'm like,
Yeah,
"Thank God that didn't happen."
yeah.
And I was so set on it too. Do you know what I mean? Like, just
Oh, of course, yeah,
really
well, and you can taste it, it's real.
yeah.
It's in front of you, and that sometimes is the hardest part.
Yeah, and I would imagine in the work that you do how long have you been with ESPN?
So I've been with ESPN for probably 2 years,
Uh-huh.
and before that, I would work for them, like, as a freelance employee, and
Yeah,
then prior
oh,
to that, which is something I still do now, which I'm gonna stop doing in August, is I do local television, in Texas, but that is I've been doing a morning show forever, and that was a gift in itself, something that I never saw myself getting into, but then when I did, I evolved in this profession as far as my skill set
right.
and the ability to sort of navigate things in front of a camera or on the air. Once I finally got the opportunity that I always had craved, doing play by play and calling games, I was ready. And
Yeah.
so, or at least I like to think I was. I'm still doing it. So, I mean, you know, it all, like we said, you look back and it all has happened for a reason. But I've been calling games for ESPN for probably about 4, 5 years, but with them specifically, like now about 2 years.
That's awesome. Now, I because of the type of work that you do, I would imagine that there was like so many opportunities for like big potential,
Mhm.
right? And
Yep.
so to like keep taking your turn at bat, like it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
is this the home run? Is this the home run? Like just having to have like that tenacity and
Oh, and
persistence.
that's the same thing my buddy was talking about earlier, and we learned that in sobriety, I think.
Yeah.
My foundation was, like you talked about, when I got sober, I had nothing. I mean, I had 0, and part of my recovery was, okay, you go to treatment, and then after treatment, it was like, okay, like, you are not well still. You don't have, a place to live. You have unsavory people that are in your life that will be in your life again if you go back into your
Yeah.
natural habitat. You need to go to an extended care, that's dressing it up, a halfway house.
Yeah.
I went to a halfway house, and at the halfway house, they were like, "You have to get a job." I worked at a Kentucky Fried Chicken. I had previously worked in the NBA before this.
Oh
So
my
there was a
gosh.
lot of, like, humility that was not of me. I was literally just doing the next indicated thing or the next suggested thing.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff set me up for, okay, like professional denial over and over again, rejection, rejection, rejection. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been rejected over the past 10 years or just ghosted or not responded to the
Right.
point where I can say that's a muscle that I could flex. It's like, oh well. You
That's
don't yeah,
exposure therapy.
yeah, I don't take that stuff personally, but, like, there's other stuff I can take very personally, on, like, a day to day, like, personal experiences, but no, so, yeah, I think that my recovery sorta set me up for that determination you're talking about and the
Yeah.
constant, "Okay, this can be my opportunity," and seeing everything as sort of an opportunity, for sure, yeah.
Yeah. Man, and that exposure therapy, it's like, we get that a lot in recovery in terms of, the self-examination and, like, just, like, looking at things through this honest lens with compassionate support. Like, I had sponsors that were super compassionate, but it was like, let's look at it." And just over and over again, it's like the shame kinda dwindles down a little bit, and you kinda get into this practice of like, "Oh, this it used to be so uncomfortable to do that self-examination," but then over
Yes.
time, gets easier.
It does get easier, and sometimes it really isn't even about the self-examination, right, in a professional, experience. It's just like, it's not about me. Like, it's
Mm,
personal, it's got
right.
0 to do with that. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not that important, really, like, it's just not about me sometimes,
It's
and
like timing, and there's other things at
a
play, and
1000%. I mean, in my experience, like, every time the phone has rang in my career and it's been something like, you would say, like, huge or significant, I never expected that phone call. It wasn't the phone call that I had dialed up or or planned. You know, it was always
Yeah.
came at the most surprising time,
Yeah.
when I wasn't expecting it, and that's just how it goes.
I love that. It's
Yeah.
like this idea that the universe wants to surprise and delight you. It's like that's how it shows up.
It's 100% the truth and experience, and that's all I'm sharing here is like, that's all
Yeah.
I have. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here. Cause and I always like to start off with childhood stuff because I feel like that sets the stage in a lot of times. I just spoke to a gal yesterday who scored a 0 on the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences
Oh, wow.
quiz, I guess it's and so for her it didn't really apply. But tell me a little bit about the household that you grew up, like a little bit about your parents and how you grew up.
Gladly. I grew up in a warm look, here's the deal. That's always like a way to really set something up, right? Here's the deal.
Here's the
I
deal.
myself
That's a
saying
good
that, but
setup.
that's when I'm about to say something I think like personal or what I deem as controversial. My brother Kevin would tell you like he had a different set of parents than I did. He was the oldest by
Ah,
7 or 8 years. My father was for sure an alcoholic. His side of the family was extremely alcoholic, up and down, and there was like, so my folks were, as much as they on the outside everything looked great, they were rough around the edges early on. Yeah, but my father just very moody, didn't was not like a day drinker, but like every day at 5 o'clock he was going to drink, and on the weekends he would start earlier, and he was so loving to me. Like from my memory, he was such a good man, but there was a lot of stuff that he just never unpacked.
mm,
That's just how it was. And so
yeah.
it was a household when, and as a kid, I can remember this. Like when my dad came home, like everybody was like, "Oh shit," like is everything in place? Is everything like because
Oh,
it's gonna he would waste no time coming down on us if stuff wasn't where it should be, or it was all his stuff. And
right.
but we were totally reactive to that and affected by it. My mom was like the sweetest, nicest mom, and still to this day, like I just talked to her earlier today, and we're very close. My father passed away. My brother Kevin, who I told you about, he passed away.
And
He was,
melanoma?
yeah, he was so he
Oh,
died at 52.
oof.
Yeah, and it sucked. He lived out in California, lived in Hermosa, and created an amazing life for him that I was lucky enough to experience. Just like I was lucky enough to experience life as his little brother growing up in suburban Philadelphia, because Kevin was always in a band. He was always like he was different than me. He was like a kind of like James Dean cool, and like he didn't care, and all the girls loved him, and my brother Michael was the same way in a sense where they kind of, and this goes back to childhood, they created a pathway for me where I was always Mike and Kevin's little brother. So I never, I there was like some bullying or some pestering, but most of that took place in the household, like with my
That's
brother.
normal.
Yeah, 100%. So I took most of my licks there, and then in high school, I started to drink, and I loved it,
Mm,
and my parents were, but the household, the last thing I'll say to put a bow on the household and my parents, like people always came to our house because of my brothers. Like my brother Kevin and Michael, they both went to Villanova University, which was right up the street from where I grew up. My mom worked at Villanova. My brother Kevin, like I mentioned, was socially active and popular dude. So was Mike. So their friends would always come to our house and go back and forth from campus to our house. And it was awesome. Like I would come home from grade school or high school, and one of my brother Kevin's friends would be there with a girlfriend doing laundry in my parents' house. Like, and it was just like, it was really cool. And
oh, like welcoming and warm
yeah, it was
and
just warm, and the kids and my parents, again, like Kevin would say, we lived in this like kind of tense household, but at the same time, like his friends were welcome
mm,
nonstop all the time. And
yeah,
and two things can be true at once.
for sure.
So that was kind of the experience there. But my parents were, I mean, to this day, I really can't say I'm not a therapist, but I think I just grew up in a household where there was some stuff. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think it was like if you break it down, you could call it whatever you want to call it. But I mean, I was very lucky. We were born on third base, thought I hit a triple. That's what I
That's
tell.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's
that's what I've heard, and I've
baseball
told.
and sports analogies.
Sports going on third base, thought I hit a triple. Yeah. Mhm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, listen, I had a friend tell me one time that nobody escapes childhood without some issues,
Yeah.
right? And it's not about we're not, like, blaming our parents, but it's just like an examination of the facts, right? It's good to understand, like, what our patterns of behavior are, what our beliefs and thoughts are, and, like, where it came from,
Yeah.
so that we can then take responsibility for the work that like, fill in the gaps of the
Truly,
work.
and I'm so indebted to my parents because they were my last. They always loved me. Like, that's my
Yeah.
experience, and, like, they were the day that I walked into the house at 33 years old, living with my parents, and I was like, "I think it's time for me to go to rehab," and they were like, "Oh, no shit, dude," you know? But they facilitated that right away, and I had
Nice.
a place to go to tell them that that's what I needed to do,
Yeah,
um, and they loved me all the way through that, so I
that's so
almost.
cool.
Yeah, yeah, I can never. I always feel weird, like, even examining, but I do, and it's very healthy to do that.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, it's not it's not an indictment or an
No,
interrogation
and
of,
I appreciate
people
you
are
saying
doing,
that. It's good to hear that.
but,
Yeah.
examining the facts is important. So it sounds like drinking started in high school. When did you realize it was problematic?
Well, my mom was really always very clear with us that we had alcoholism in our family from very
Oh,
much since I can remember. She was not alcoholic at all, and I think that when she started to get comfortable in her own skin, she started to voice some of the things that she had been thinking for a while, like going to my dad's family's place in Connecticut and, like, right after church, everybody's drinking and they're drinking all day into the night and they're getting wasted. And it's like that was 100% par for the course. Business as
Catholic?
usual. Oh yeah, Catholic. Oh yeah,
Y'all
Catholic.
drink at church,
Oh
here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Catholic. My dad had all like he was Irish, Scottish, Portuguese. He just had everything
Oh,
mixed bag.
dear.
Like the potion was there.
You got it all.
I got it all, yeah, and so, I knew, I really knew looking back, I always say this, when I was in 8th grade, I was terrified to go to dances, and when I was in 9th grade and I was drinking, I couldn't wait to get there,
Right.
and I started to realize, that alcoholism I liked it way too much, alcohol, I knew that, and
Yeah.
I knew that this was a gift that I was never going to turn back to the
Mm.
gods that had bestowed it upon me. And I really thought it was like a life hack. I could talk to
Yeah.
girls. I had courage. I could stand up to guys. I didn't care what people thought as much when I was drinking. It was this amazing thing. And, I started to realize in high school, like, this is bad because I started to take uh, prescription pills that didn't belong to me. And I did it all the time.
What
And
kind?
my mom, like I mentioned, she wasn't an addict and she had all kinds of like downers and stuff, like for whether it was Vicodin or like what you would call oxys today. She had all of her prescriptions left over in her medicine cabinet. And I
Oh.
can remember I don't know what moved me to take one, but I did one day. And it was like another life changing experience. Like, oh my God, so I can do this now and walk
Yeah.
into school and nobody's going to know, like,
Oh,
so I was
wow.
I figured that was another life hack. Like
Yeah.
I'm on these things all day. And then what happened for me that really was my first major consequence when I figured it was a problem was I was going to play. I developed into like a football player, and I was like, I got a scholarship. Grew up this rail skinny kid, and I started to really dedicate myself to football, and I got a scholarship to go to the University of Richmond, and everything was all good. And then I was going into into the summer where I was going into my freshman year of college, and I went to play in this high school football all-star game in Philly. And the doctor there was like, "You have something wrong with your heart. It's beating funny. Um, so I can't clear you to play in this all-star game till you see a cardiologist." And I saw the cardiologist, and the cardiologist was like, "You have cardiomyopathy, and
Oh.
it's pretty bad. It's severe. Like, there's no way you can play football." And they were like, "There's a handful of ways. What I remember, there's two ways you could have gotten this. It could have been one, like a virus, because it's called viral cardiomyopathy, or
Right.
you could have gotten it through, you know, alcohol and drugs. And I remember being like, yeah, virus. Like, no way was it the alcohol and drugs. And in my mind, I'm thinking like,
Wow.
oh shit. Like the wall started
Wow.
to close in. That was my first major consequence when in my heart of hearts, I knew that it was because of alcohol and drugs. Even if it wasn't, that's what I knew, right? In my head, because
Yeah.
I've been abusing the shit out of my body, like drinking all the time, working out all the time, taking all kinds of prescription drugs, like anything. You know, you hand it to me,
Right.
I would take it and then ask you what it was. Like that was like all day,
That sounds
right?
familiar.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So so that was a big consequence and also a real sign when I look back because I was like, oh well, it's not the alcohol. It was must have been a virus. Like so that's when I started to realize like, oh wow, this thing's like going off the rails. But I can't let it because I love it so much.
Yeah. I'm curious about the cardiomyopathy. I had a cousin who actually died from that.
Yeah.
So how did you heal? Did you heal from that or
Oh, I'm not healed. So it's basically it was viral. So my heart um healed to a degree. It was like
okay.
they have this thing called, and people that are familiar, it's called ejection fraction, and it's basically your heart's function. And my
Okay.
ejection fraction was like so low, like a 20, which is like bad. Like they would like, I remember I went through the like the cardio unit at Penn Hospital in Philly, and they were like, there were kids who weren't getting out of bed because they had the same exact numbers and stuff that I did, but I was what they called asymptomatic. Uh,
Wow.
so, so basically, they put me on meds, which I didn't take at all when I was drinking and using. I took for a little bit. Um, you know, and I have this heart problem. You want to talk about insanity, and I turned into a raging cocaine addict and alcoholic, and you know, everything. And I'm still in college because they kept my scholarship,
Mm.
but I'm smoking weed and drinking all the time, and the cardiomyopathy was something I just ignored until just 2 years ago. I started to really start to take my meds. Mind you, I've been sober for 10 years, so I'm still like an idiot, right? Like I still kind of didn't like address like that.
All right.
I would see my doctor and stuff, but for years they were like, you need to get a defibrillator. And I finally did this past like 2 summers ago. I got a pacemaker defibrillator, which is like a insurance policy if something were to happen. And I
Right.
take my medicine and you know, everything. I feel good today, um,
Okay.
and I'm able to do whatever. Uh,
Yeah.
there's you know, as far as like long term, I could do kind of think like because I want to live long. I'm
Yeah.
always like, you know, I need to start just making healthier decisions, like we all think. But I think the stakes are kind of high for somebody that has my condition. I know my doctors would tell you that.
Yeah, for sure. And your mom.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
Your mom will tell you that. Okay,
yeah,
that's really interesting. So it
yeah,
just sort of highlights the insanity of this disease where
yeah.
it's like you're living with this heart condition and you're doing cocaine.
Yeah, and I'm taking any kind of upper. You know, I
Any,
any uppers, Adderall, cocaine. It was like that was like my thing. And you mix that with alcohol. It was like, where has this been? And
yeah.
my that was the moment I was living in New York after college. And I remember the first time I really like did my own cocaine, like where I got a drug dealer, I went into the bathroom with my own bag and I did it. And I just remember thinking like this is something I need to do probably every day for the rest of my life. Like this is that's what went off in my brain.
Right.
That's how, and that's why it was easy for me. Not easy, but eventually when I was ready to put down the sword and
Yeah.
all the weaponry and stop fighting, is like, dude, something happens to me when this stuff goes into my brain. It does not happen to other people that I know and people that I love and respect. Like
Yeah.
there's something going on here that like
Yeah.
doesn't make me a bad guy. It just makes
Right.
me somebody who needs to eliminate this stuff from my life. It's so simple, right? If we hear this, and if I told you tomatoes would kill you, wouldn't you stop having tomatoes? Like, yeah,
Right.
but I
Yeah.
couldn't stop. I couldn't resist this stuff.
I know. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
terrible feeling to,
yeah,
to be wrestling with is like, I know I have to stop doing this, but I can't. It
yeah.
feels like we can't.
Oh, it feel 100%, but we can.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
Yeah, with help.
yeah, yeah.
So, so did you do jail? Did you ever go to jail or
I mean, I went to jail a bunch of times for the DUIs, like little, like nothing huge,
oh,
but
just a little DUI?
I mean, yeah, yeah. Go on, I didn't kill anybody, you know, but I
Yeah.
try to minimize
No
that.
homicide. That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
That's
But
good.
I did. I mean, I got my first DUI when I was a senior in college, and then I got another one like 2 years after that. And I like to spread them out. I got like another one. So I ended up racking up like a bunch. And my and I was so, because of my alcoholism, I would say like incompetent about just handling like shit. Like I still struggle with like executing like little stuff. I didn't have a license till I was 21. So I was like borrowing other people's cars and getting DUIs.
Pete,
Like,
that's
yeah. Oh
so
yeah, yeah.
funny.
Right. Yeah.
It's
Funny now,
hilarious.
right? Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, I was totaling cars that didn't belong to me and I was licensed to drive. And
You're a
this is
terrible
like,
friend.
yeah, I know, right? But no, it's all good, right? Like, pat you on the back and hit you with the
Yeah,
swing
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah.
We're still gonna be friends. That was what I thought was okay. And
Yeah.
uh, yeah, so legal trouble, sure, there was legal trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what was it that finally, like, did you have a moment of clarity where you were just like, that's it, I'm done? Or was it a process? I hear from a lot of people that it's like a process, but sometimes there are moments that sort of
There was
change our
so many
history.
consequences, and so much pain. I mean, so many relationships that were just completely fried, and so many opportunities. Like I was gift wrapped a lot of great opportunities, and some of
Mhm.
which, I had a little bit of clarity at times in drinking where I would like work for them. But like for the most part, I was put in incredible opportunities to get offered opportunities or put in incredible situations to get these opportunities. And I think that really started to resonate with me when I couldn't get any more. Um,
Mm.
nobody wanted to be my friend, and my family members had cut me off. I think the last story I what the last thing that really happened was I was dating this girl. We went over to one of my best friends, a brother of mine, basically today. He's sober now. Talk to this guy every day. And he was still drinking at the time, and boy, I was too, big time. He was like normal, like had like a house and normal people hanging out with him. And he was like, I'm having a party, come over. And I got there and I was just in bad shape, like on like all kind, like whatever. And I got into a fight with this girl. He threw me out of the party. We left the party. We tried to leave the house. It was raining. We drove the car into a creek. So
Oof.
now we're at this like regular house party and we've like completely ruined it. And we come back in, we're muddy, we're fighting. My buddy was just like, dude, you gotta go. And the next day we had to get the car towed out of the creek. So the car's getting towed out of the creek. And I remember being like to him, like, hey, can we keep this between us? And he was like, dude, like what? And he told me, he said, you're not the guy that I used to love, like 15, 20 years ago.
Oof.
Because we grew up together in our teens. And then, but what happened was I was with this woman the next day. And somehow, I mean, I still don't even know. My brother got her phone number and like her phone, because my phone was lost in the mud. And she was like, it's your brother. I was like, how did he get this number? And I just knew like this is over. This is it. This is it. And I wanted to stop and I couldn't stop. I kept going to meetings and I would leave and drink. This was like for about a month in October of 2011. And then this guy took me to I asked this guy to be my temporary sponsor, and he was like, "All right, like I'll pick you up and we'll go to a meeting." And at this point, it was still pretty much like a shell game for me. Like I wanted to keep drinking, and I have to show that I have a sponsor, so people believe that I'm in the program. But this had happened. I'm in this situation now on the heels of that party, and my brother called me, and this guy's like, "Hey, I'll pick you up. We'll go to a meeting, like I told you, and we go to a restaurant." He's like, I was like, shit, because I was like on drugs at the time. So I was like, now I got to sit in front of this guy. He's like, let's just go to dinner and talk. And this guy tells me pretty much his story. And the best advice I ever got, I guess, was unsolicited because he said to me, but it was part of his story. He was an alcoholic sharing another. But the guy did say, he goes, you should probably go to rehab. And that was one card I hadn't played because in my mind, I always thought that I wasn't that bad. Which I mean, come and and
Despite all the evidence to the contrary.
yeah, I felt like if you didn't go to rehab, you never actually relapsed. So that
Ah,
was like,
alcoholic logic.
yeah, oh, of course. So I said, yeah, I said it was like God opened up. the smallest window,
Yeah.
and I just crawled and fell on the other side. And
Wow.
that moment, I really did feel a huge weight off me because I remember thinking like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. And I did it. I mean, I told my parents, and at that point, it was just like I just kind of had to show up to get taken to rehab, and
Yeah.
then the magic started to really. I mean, it was pretty wild. What started to happen? The amazing stuff that started to happen, like internally.
What was it that started to happen?
I started to well, I just quit fighting. I mean, truly, I quit fighting, and I really, really embraced sobriety. Like when I was in,
Mm,
like I wouldn't say that I was like, you know, the most attentive person or there were more people who were probably more into it than I was, quote unquote, but I was showing up at everything knowing that like and look, it's like this, Arlena, like it made me feel good. So I kept doing it.
yeah.
Like
Mhm.
if I was vulnerable in a group session, I felt good afterwards. And
Yeah.
then I would talk to somebody else about addiction and recovery from addiction after that group, and I would feel good. And I started to, like, one of the things that got me there, this is crazy, but I remember because I was talking to somebody about this recently. When I was talking about going to treatment, this guy was like, when you get there, they'll put you on like something like a Valium. And I remember being like, ooh, like,
Really?
because they want to make sure you don't seize from the drugs you take.
Right.
The first couple of days, they put you on tapers or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and so once all that was like over and the fog like totally lifted, I remember too, a key moment was a guy was talking to all of us in the rehab, and it was almost like a "this is your brain on drugs." But I remember he was like, "Okay, here's your brain right now. You just got into rehab. This is like the average person that comes in here, and the brain is like really messed up. All the damage you've done, right, to the
Mhm.
frontal lobe or whatever. A doctor would say this better than me. And then like there's 18 months after, and your brain is like you tell it starts to heal. It's almost
Yeah.
back to normal. And then there's like 3 years after, and then like and it was quicker than that. It was like 6 months, 18 months. It was like back to normal. Well, a lot quicker than I thought it was possible. I
Right.
never thought I'd be normal again. And I
Yeah.
remember thinking, like, or asking somebody or asking the speaker, like, so I can, like, you tell me I'll be able to go to the movies, have popcorn and like candy, and that will blow my mind like it did when I was like in seventh grade. And they were basically like, yeah. And I remember thinking, like, all right, like I'm in. Like, this is like that's even more of the reason. And there
Yeah.
was another experience I share this with people like because I think it's important for people in early sobriety. At least it was important for me. The woman I was dating, who just wasn't ready to date anybody, and neither was I. We were both on the same train. She showed up to the rehab where I was, and she had like we got into like a little bit of a fight. Like she was showing me pictures of her daughter on her phone, and a text message came up from a guy, and I started to get like insecure, and I was like, "Who's the guy? Who is he? Like, show me the message." And I'm in rehab. I'm 14 days sober, and up until this point, it's been smooth sailing. And I remember being like, we were in a chapel at the rehab, and I don't remember exactly. I think I asked God for the strength or something happened, but I was like, "Hey, I'd like you to leave. Like, clearly this isn't working." She got what happens when you do uncomfortable shit, like more than likely, like in my experience, like it's hard, but she got up and she left. She caused like a little bit of a scene, but like she left, and I was like, wow, I feel so good. I just did something that I would have run from doing for months in sobriety or
Mhm.
in active addiction. And I did it in sobriety. The stuff
Wow.
I used to always take to have courage to do this, I didn't even do it with. And I executed it and I feel amazing. And that was the first esteemable act that I ever produced in sobriety. And now even today, when I can do esteemable things, I'll feel good,
Yeah.
but I still have that guy in me that doesn't want to do the hard thing. But so that was like a pretty big turning point. That and when I got to the halfway house and they were like, you got to get a job. And I worked at KFC. And that gave me a pretty good perspective on life.
Yeah. Listen, they say that the quality of your life depends on your willingness to have uncomfortable conversations. And what a perfect example of being honest with yourself and having the courage to be honest with someone else,
Yeah.
knowing how uncomfortable it's going to be. But then you get the reward on the other side, cause and effect, right? You are honest, you were compassionate, but then you got to feel free at the other side of it.
And they say, to your point, you know, this doing things in sobriety the right way gives me that same juice that alcohol and drugs gave me. That is no BS. That is a fact as far as my experience has been concerned. So,
Yeah.
like, if this wasn't fun, or if I wouldn't be doing it. I
Right.
promise you, I would have gone back to drinking and using a long ago. But it's
Isn't that funny?
yeah,
Everyone thinks that when they get sober, like, oh, all the fun is life is over.
that's what I
It's just,
thought. Yeah,
and is that true?
not true at
Oh,
all.
no.
Yeah,
Let's talk about some of the fun things because I really enjoy the type of work that you're doing. You
yeah,
know, you've done some really cool stuff in sobriety and you've been able to maintain like a sense of groundedness. You know, you talk about being right sized, you know, and that's kind of, 12 step speak for what happens when you go through the process of all the
yeah,
steps. And it sounds like you had a sponsor and you did all the steps. Is that
sure, yeah,
accurate? Yeah.
uh-huh,
And then doing therapy and stuff. I mean, we really heal a lot of this stuff, which allows us to enjoy life and actually achieve things and create a life we love. Tell me a little bit about what life is like now. You were just talking about something like amazing that had happened.
yeah.
What
Well,
kind of
no, I
stuff?
mean, I'm just, I, I want to say, well, AA, right? Like, and like recovery, 12
Yeah.
step, but
Yeah.
recovery, we'll just say,
Okay.
um, has given me such confidence. It enabled me to start putting myself back out there. And,
Nice.
through the work I did with step work and all that stuff, like there were people who professionally I had, lit a match and burnt the bridge.
Oh,
And when the time was right, working with my sponsor, I would connect with them, doing amends. And, if they didn't move on, I sure did. And 99% of the time they did too. They were
yeah.
like, no sweat. And
No.
that reinvigorated me professionally. And because I'd worked in sports prior to my addiction getting just completely off the rails. So I sort of flamed out, not like in dramatic fashion, but all the people I'd worked with in pro sports or college sports, or, I worked at USA basketball. They knew that Pete was a wayward soul addicted to alcohol and drugs. So people now were starting to see me in a light where I was healthy, and opportunity started to show up. And I started to prepare like crazy for them. And some, like I said, some I just couldn't prepare for because I just wasn't ready yet.
Yeah.
Like I remember I hosted a studio show for the NBA like development league in like 2011, and it went terrible. I mean, I was nervous. I was just it sucked. I sucked, you know. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like my career is over. It just went down the train. Then I got into TV news and I got an audition to go work at a station in Nashville, which was like, oh my gosh, this will be great. I didn't get the job. I sucked. I couldn't audition. I was always so nervous. And, finally, I started to get the opportunities that I had always craved, calling games, then calling games for ESPN, then calling games in major conferences, huge games for ESPN. And those are the things now that have come into my life, but it's all because of sobriety. I'll mention this, and this is like the biggest irony ever for me, but it's God working. When I 4 years ago, it was during the pandemic, and the guy, the podcast network where I live in Texas, and I live in Waco, they came to the TV station I worked at, and they were like, "We're going to give a free pod." They were just starting up. We're going to have a free podcast for people who are interested. If you play this game, whatever. We talked about it. So that planted a seed with me. And like a week later, because I'd always wanted to do something with recovery because it goes back to that book, and really people like you who are carrying the message publicly. That book, Moments of Clarity, I talked about,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
podcasts
Yeah.
like this, and documentaries on sober people. I was like, I just think there can never be enough of that, and I
Right.
wanted to share people's stories in recovery. And so I called it the podcast network. I told them what I wanted to do. They were like, absolutely. And I started to do it. And that I took on even a more public forum in sobriety. And people were like, oh, wow. Like the news guy is sober. Like, did you hear this? And like, and the people, I could tell you the people who I work for a big corporation, like TV news corporation called Gray Television. They were like, hey, go for it. Like, you want to
Wow.
do it. That was the first thing I had to do. I had to ask them. My
Yeah.
general manager, this guy Josh Young, and my news director Bob Walters, they were like, "Go for it, do it." because they knew that's who I was. They knew
Yeah.
I was sober. And when I started to do that podcast 4 years ago, things really started to happen fast for me in all other facets of my life professionally. Um, and it opened doors for me that I never had imagined would open.
So
And
cool.
then I'm sitting courtside calling all these games that I would, as a kid, sit in front of my TV screen, turn the volume down and call. So, and it's very surreal. I mean, even now, I have the imposter syndrome. Even now, and I this past weekend, I did the Big 12, which is like the area of the country I live, Texas, Oklahoma, those schools, Baylor. I did the Big 12 tournament for the Big 12 and ESPN, and it was Big 12 softball, which I do a lot of football, a lot of basketball, some baseball. I love softball, but I don't get to do it that often, and it's awesome. I love like it was just such a thrilling experience because I was so terrified going into it.
Right.
That fear creates a tailwind, and
Oh,
so
right. Yeah.
it gets me to work really hard to prepare, and it's
Um,
it taps into my God-given skills. It puts me in a
right.
position to succeed. So those are the things like going on in my life now, and it God willing will continue to grow. Um, and if it doesn't, like we talked about off the bat, right? I think it was offline, but
Yeah.
I really it's a public thing that I'm involved in, and I try to like stay grounded and remember
Yeah.
like, life is about sobriety and who I am today. Like, and I do know this, like if all that was stripped away, it would suck for a little bit, but through recovery, I'd be fine. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
even when I get like big time rejections or things crumble, like I'm usually in the dumps for like a week, but I come
Mhm.
out of it. Um,
Yeah.
so, but that's where I'm at. Those are the things that are going on, and it's literally that kid that you said say to your sober self, or he wasn't a
Yeah.
kid, I was in my 30s, but and that's the thing too. I dared to believe, like
Oh, yeah.
recovery made me believe in myself. If I told people like when I was 33 where I was like a week sober, like this is what I'm going to do, they would have been like, no way. And some of them did. Most people supported me, but some of them were like, even I knew it. They were like, good luck, okay, but here we are, and it's like that slow process. It does not happen overnight, and that's the best
Mhm.
thing that could happen for me. And it's still happening. Like I'm a ways off from some of my goals, but I'm definitely enjoying the ride big time.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing such cool stuff, and from, like, an outsider's perspective, it's super cool,
Yeah,
right? Like,
it's
it's
fun, and
got
everybody knows I'm sober. Like the girl I work with
yeah.
this week, Natasha Watley, one of the best softball players in the world. Her and I, we drove together to the games, and by like the second or third day, we were just talking about life, and I was like, yeah, like I'm sober, and right away she was like super like interested in that, as I was
Oh,
interested in her story and where she came
yeah.
from, and it's like wherever I go, I'm that sober person. Like
Yeah.
it affects the way I act, the way I treat people, like the conversations I've had with people like you, like they work through me, hopefully all the time. Unfortunately, that's not the case, you know.
Still
Um,
human.
yeah, totally. But I mean, that's wherever I go, I'm sober, and that's like,
Yeah.
and I don't hesitate to tell people. I don't run them down and tell them, but if it comes up, it comes up.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important to like it's almost I always felt like telling people I'm sober is kind of like coming out in a way because
Yes.
you're kind of revealing something
Yeah.
personal about yourself.
Especially
And
going like you've been at it for 3 decades, right?
yeah,
Like I've been at it for 12 years. We're sort of removed from that real dark chaos where everybody knew us as the addict. So now
right.
it's almost like we have an option. Am I going to tell this person? Or am I not going to tell them?
Yeah.
Like I think I will. Like to what you're saying, like it is a reveal.
Yeah, like like in work environments, it would I was in tech sales in Silicon Valley, and that's a hit. Sales is technology. I was account executive at places like HP or Adobe, startups and all that stuff. And it's a heavy drinking culture. And it would always come up. There was like this one quarter end where I used to sit across from my boss. And at the end of the quarter, they lined up shots of Fireball on my cube wall and did it in front of me, and I was like, "That's cool, whatever."
It's like one of those moments, right? You're like, yeah, I guess this is how this is going to be right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Sometimes,
I
like,
was used to it by then, but
yeah,
it's
but
just kind of funny.
it is, and you do. That's the one thing too. Like you tried to instill in other people who you sponsor, or people who ask you about this stuff, or people for me, like I see in meetings, like it's not always unicorns and rainbows, right? Like
No.
sometimes, like I was straight up like institutionalized for like 6 months. If you want to really get into it, like I was at a
Yeah.
rehab, I was at a sober in a sober community. I actually lived with another sober guy for like a year and a half after that. So like for me, I didn't, like, venture out into the wild until I was 18 months sober, you know? I didn't go on a date till I was, like, a year and a half sober, but, like, there's no place I can't go now. There's no pla
Right.
if I have a singleness of purpose or need to be there, I mean, no place. And if
Yeah.
I have no business being there, I'll be like, I'm gonna leave because I'm
Yeah.
comfortable in my own skin to call that shot, like, you know? I usually will go home now, not because I have to or because I'm tempted, it's because I wanna go to bed. And home,
Right.
the rat, you know?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
rough. It's my favorite thing to do is like
yeah.
tuck in and be like in my little safe space.
See you later.
Right. Long are the days of needing to see the sunrise.
Yes, yes. Thank God.
That's funny. Oh my God. Well, listen, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you.
Yes.
I just really admire the work that you're doing and how far you've come and your ability to stay grounded. And I'm just so excited to watch your career and all the things that you're doing. And I will like literally get to watch your career because you're on TV and stuff. I was going to ask you, you're in Waco. Have you met Chip and Joanna Gaines?
I've been no, I met Joanna's dad when I first got here. I've seen them so many times, like, I've called
Yeah.
games and they've been right there courtside. I've been too scared to go up and introduce myself.
You.
Uh, I
So
have,
funny.
yeah, but yeah, like, I've been around them, and, like, I they're the best people because
Yeah.
they bring a lot of good vibes and positivity.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
like, I see them as super cool, and I'm like, it makes living here, pretty cool.
Yeah, I had to ask 'cause I figured, you're doing the morning show, you probably had
Yeah.
a
Oh,
good
yeah, she was
story
an
on them or
intern at
something.
the station I work at, like, from years back, and apparently, like, I know they're the real deal. They're good people. They do a lot of good.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
really seem like it. That's so
yeah,
awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so excited. Like I was on your podcast, so I'm
yeah.
excited to listen to it.
I
But
know, come
I'll
on, it was my bad. We put it out, like, 3 weeks ago. We gotta get it out there.
that's so funny.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Good deal. Well, it's such a pleasure. I'll look forward to another conversation in the future.
Absolutely.